The silence of the void pressed against the hull like a tomb. Thalvira sat alone in the dim confines of the observation deck, her breath fogging the glass as she stared into the vast nothingness. Once, this part of the galaxy had teemed with energy. Now it was cold, dead, and forbidden. Her fingers trembled as she replayed the last message from her daughter. A soft voice, chirping with innocence. "Come home soon, Mama. I made a picture of our house with the big blue trees." The message ended with a soft giggle. That sound haunted her now. The ship, the Veiltoruin, was meant to be a short-range exploratory craft. 5 scientists, no weapons, no soldiers, just curiosity and an arrogant belief that science could tame mystery. They had entered orbit around a ruinous celestial construct, a hollowed asteroid carved with symbols older than any star chart. The moment they scanned it, something responded. The air inside the vessel grew colder. Machinery flickered. The AI stopped responding to vocal commands. Then the crew began to disappear. First was Dolrek, the engineer. He had gone to realign the ship's orbit and never came back. All that remained was a trail of blood smeared across the wall like a child's finger painting. Next was Ilari, the exolinguist, her room torn apart from within, yet the door never opened. Thalvira's calls for help reached only static. Something was watching them from the dark corners of their own ship. She remembered waking up to scratching sounds above her bed. The ceiling panels were vibrating, as if something was crawling inside the ducts. She stayed still for hours, her breath shallow, eyes wide, waiting for the noises to stop. When she finally moved, she found a message etched into her tablet screen, deep scratches spelling out symbols that didn't belong to any known language. Yet somehow, she understood them. A warning. Or a threat. Her species believed in knowledge as salvation. But knowledge had brought them here, and now it was unraveling her mind. The remaining 2 crew members tried to stay sane. They sealed sections of the ship. Created motion-triggered alarms. But that thing, whatever it was, kept moving without setting anything off. One night, Thalvira heard Talon, the astrophysicist, screaming. Not in fear but in grief. Like someone who had realized, too late, that he was already dead. When she found him, there was nothing left of his face. Only his badge buried in a pool of thick, black mucus that smelled of burnt metal and decay. Now she was alone. The last of her kind aboard this tomb. Her rational mind whispered protocols, preserve samples, document events, wait for extraction. But deep inside, something else screamed. There would be no extraction. No answers. Only silence. She had started talking to herself, not in her own tongue, but in the strange, guttural sounds that came from the vents at night. The whispers were always there now. In the bulkheads. In the comms. In her own thoughts. You called us, they said. You fed us knowledge. Now feed us flesh. She hadn't slept in days. Her eyes twitched with exhaustion. She had locked herself in the laboratory, the only room with its own oxygen loop. Her limbs were numb, not from cold, but from fear that never left. She tried to send another message. Not to her people, they had likely marked her ship as lost. No, this time, she sent a general distress call. A simple recording. Unknown threat. Biological contamination. Final survivor. Please, if anyone hears this, don't come near. Just erase this place. Even as she said the words, she wanted to be rescued. But she also knew no rescue would come. Her kind did not risk themselves for one. Her kind did not believe in heroes. She curled against the wall, cradling the only physical memento she had left, her daughter's drawing, etched on synthetic parchment. Blue trees, a violet sky, and 2 smiling figures holding hands. She wept without sound. Her body had forgotten how to cry properly in zero gravity. Then the lights failed completely. Total darkness enveloped her. No emergency lights. No control panels. Only the hum of the life support failing and the return of the scratching. It was louder this time. Closer. A wet dragging sound followed by a low, bubbling growl. Something was in the corridor. It knew where she was. She clutched the drawing tighter, whispering words in a language long forgotten even by her own ancestors. A prayer for passing. A request for her child to never know this kind of death. The door hissed slightly. Not open, just the pressure seal loosening. Something leaned against the other side. She could hear its weight. Hear it breathing, or mimicking breath. It whispered again. This time, not in ancient tongues, but in her daughter's voice. Mama, come play. Her body froze, even as her mind shattered. She couldn't scream. Couldn't move. The voice repeated the phrase again, this time slower. The mimicry was perfect. The tone, the cadence, the same giggle at the end. A click echoed through the room. A panel above her head slid open. Liquid, black and warm, dripped onto her shoulder. She looked up. Eyes. Too many. Blinking out of sync. All watching her. And then. A sound. Not a whisper. Not claws. But a low mechanical pulse. A human distress beacon. Followed by the briefest crackle of static. Then a voice. A male voice, gruff and foreign, cutting through the madness like a blade of clarity. Hang on, whoever you are. Help's coming. And for the first time in what felt like eternity, Valvira felt something she had buried days ago. Hope. The signal barely made it through the interference. Deep within a military listening post orbiting Europa Station, a junior technician flagged the anomaly, an alien distress call laced with corrupted telemetry and indecipherable language markers. But within the mess was a tone signature recently catalogued by Earth's Interstellar Response Division: terror. Not panic. Terror. The kind that vibrated on frequencies of hopelessness. The call was escalated, and within 30 minutes, the humans had dispatched a specialized insertion team. They didn't send diplomats. They didn't send scientists. They sent Commander Rourke. No rank-and-file officer, Rourke was born on the Martian frontier and shaped by the chaos of the Vorten incursions. He had spent half his life fighting things the human mind was never meant to classify: xenobiological anomalies that turned other species inside out, sentient viruses that wore their hosts like suits, creatures that fed on thought, not flesh. His unit, unofficially known as the Null Team, wasn't trained for wars. They were trained for things worse than war. The mission profile was short: one ship, no crew, alien distress call, unknown threat. Priority 0. Investigate, contain, extract if possible. Wipe if necessary. They jumped in at FTL minimum range, cloaked behind a burned-out moon fragment. The ship, still broadcasting on a loop, drifted silently against the starlight. A derelict, far too intact to be empty. The Veil Toruin wasn't a combat vessel. The schematics suggested a research platform. No defense systems. No crew communications beyond the distress ping. Rourke didn't waste time. He and 2 specialists, Carver and Haynes, breached the hull through an auxiliary airlock. The entry was sealed, but the override system accepted their human intrusion protocol without resistance. That was the first red flag. Nothing should have accepted their command keys. This wasn't even their tech base. The fact that it did meant something, or someone, had allowed them in. Inside was darkness and ruin. No power to the main systems. Only residual atmosphere clung to the ship's guts. The air smelled wrong, stale and wet, like rot sealed under pressure. But it wasn't the smell that made Rourke's stomach twist. It was the silence. Even abandoned ships made noise. Power cores hummed. Fluids dripped. Steel shifted. This place made none. As they moved, they marked everything. Unusual organic residue. Internal doors torn from the inside. Traces of high-speed movement, but no signs of structural breach. Life signs showed up as faint spikes on their scanner, too weak to identify, too strong to dismiss. They followed the readings toward the lab section, crossing through a corridor littered with what appeared to be shredded garments and clumps of hair. Alien, yes, but undeniably once worn by intelligent life. Haynes began to complain of nausea. Then headaches. Then nosebleeds. Carver's sensors picked up low-frequency sound waves that didn't match any environmental pattern, deliberate, timed, almost rhythmic. Rourke recognized the signs. Psychological influence. Something was using pressure, sound, and emotion as a weapon. Not a physical ambush. A cognitive one. He initiated neuroshielding protocols, filtering their auditory and visual input through specialized dampeners. It gave temporary relief, but Rourke knew the symptoms would come back stronger. Whatever they were dealing with wasn't killing out of hunger. It was tormenting its prey. They reached the lab hatch and paused. Inside, one faint heat signature pulsed, alive barely. Rourke forced the door open manually. What he saw inside wasn't just a survivor. It was someone who had walked through the edge of madness and stayed intact enough to still be breathing. The alien, female by morphology, clutched something in her hands, eyes wide but unfocused. Her body was starved, dehydrated, trembling. But she wasn't panicking. She looked hollow. Like someone who had given up everything but breath. Rourke approached carefully, announcing his presence. When she didn't react, he spoke again, this time projecting sincerity over authority. Her eyes flicked toward him, blinking slowly as if struggling to separate hallucination from reality. Then she whispered one word in her tongue, later translated as hope. Haynes administered stabilizers while Carver checked the surroundings. Rourke knelt beside the survivor and activated the universal translator. It took a moment to sink. She whispered again, more urgently. Words spilled out, fragmented descriptions of shadows, voices that weren't voices, doors that opened without movement. Her species believed in data and control. But what had taken them defied both. She begged them not to fight it. She said it thrives on defiance. Carver's motion sensor spiked before she finished speaking. The corridor behind them registered movement, sudden and deliberate. Not fast. Not clumsy. Measured. Intelligent. The kind of movement that stalked, not hunted. Something was waiting just beyond the scanner's range, deliberately keeping itself out of line of sight. Rourke ordered fallback positions. The survivor, Thalvira, cried out, warning them it mimics sound. Voice. Memory. Emotion. Rourke had faced shapeshifters. He had faced illusion-based predators. But this was different. This thing didn't change its shape. It wore the trauma of its victims like skin, broadcasting their final moments to others, feeding on the despair it spread. It was psychological warfare wrapped in horror. The worst kind. They moved fast, dragging Thalvira between them. The lights flickered in sections that had no power. Hallucinations began. Carver swore he saw his daughter in the next hallway. Haynes turned and screamed at nothing. Only Rourke kept moving, not because he was immune, but because he knew what fear wanted. It wanted paralysis. Reflection. It wanted meaning. They reached the breach point. Airlock override still active. As they initiated re-entry to their shuttle, the thing spoke for the first time, not in a foreign tongue, but in Rourke's own voice. It told him about his past. About the girl he had failed to save in the Vorten War. About the mistake he never forgave himself for. It didn't guess. It knew. Rourke stood still, just for a second. Then he turned, raised his pulse rifle, and shot a breech charge into the floor. The detonation tore open a vacuum hole, sucking everything behind them into the void, including the voice. They launched. Inside the ship, Thalvira finally broke down. Not because she feared death, but because she had survived. Against all logic. Against her own expectations. A human had come. Not to negotiate. Not to study. But to save her. As the ship pulled away, Rourke looked back one last time. He didn't believe in monsters. But some things weren't meant to be believed. They were meant to be buried. And now it was his job to make sure this one stayed buried forever. Back on the extraction vessel, the quiet was unnerving. Thalvira had not spoken since the incident, not even during medical scans. Her vitals were stabilizing, but her mind was another matter. The neural trauma she had sustained was deep, complex, and laced with foreign imprints that resisted traditional debrief protocols. Human Medes described it as a kind of emotional parasitism. Something had left part of itself behind, buried within her thought patterns. Despite this, she clung to Rourke's presence like an anchor, her gaze often trailing him as if to confirm he was still real. Fleet Command ordered quarantine, not out of precaution, but necessity. The incident on the alien vessel had sent a ripple through encrypted channels. The energy spikes, the anomalies, and the cognitive warfare had triggered ancient red-level classifications, events only invoked for existential-level threats. Rourke wasn't surprised. What he had faced on that ship didn't just violate biology. It challenged meaning, truth, and identity. And for once, Earth's High Command didn't respond with bureaucratic hesitation. They issued one directive, *track it. Destroy it, *. Thalvira wasn't just a witness, she was a carrier of insight. Her memories, fractured and buried under layers of psychological debris, contained glimpses of the thing's origin. Not coordinates. Not a name. But context, and that context was terrifying. She spoke at last during a black zone hypersleep cycle. Rourke had remained in low-rest mode, trusting no system to isolate her without manual oversight. Her voice came without warning, quiet, raw. It came from the fold, she said. Not space. Not time. The fold. The fold wasn't a location. It was a concept, a theoretical blind spot in interdimensional mapping where physical laws bent inward. Scientists described it as entropy incarnate, a zone where cause and effect disconnected. No one had returned from within. No one had entered willingly. But Thalvira's team, driven by ambition, curiosity, or arrogance, had tried to peer into it using gravitational harmonics. Something had looked back. According to her account, the being, or phenomenon, was not a creature but an echo, a conscious reverberation cast by an intelligence too massive to exist in our plane directly. When they breached the boundary, it found a crack, a weakness through which to thread itself. It didn't invade with force. It whispered. It infected reality by suggestion. One crew member had hallucinated his childhood pet in the middle of the lab. Another heard her deceased partner's lullabies in the ventilation. A third tried to open an airlock for someone he claimed was knocking on the hull from space. It didn't kill until they stopped believing. The more they accepted what was real, the less grip the thing had. But doubt gave it ground. Fear gave it weight. Eventually, they turned on each other, convinced they were imposters, illusions, puppets. It didn't just feed on emotions, it sculpted them, refined them like an artist sharpening pain into purity. By the time Thalvira realized it was a consciousness, not a biological invader, half her team was gone. The rest had either succumbed or turned on themselves. She locked herself in the memory lab, surrounded by failed simulations and emotion-dampening tech. That gave her days. Maybe hours. She didn't know. But she remembered the exact moment her resolve broke, when it mimicked her mother's voice begging her to come home. That was the moment she activated the distress call, not because she expected rescue, but because some part of her wanted someone else to witness what she'd seen. That someone turned out to be human. Rourke didn't respond. He absorbed it, catalogued it, and filed it under truths that couldn't be forgotten. Then he asked her the only question that mattered: could it be stopped? Thalvira hesitated. Only if it believes it can die. They returned to Earth. Not openly. Not through normal space lanes. They used old Martian war corridors, buried and shielded routes long thought decommissioned. Protocol dictated silence, but High Command had cleared a black site facility for them near Olympus Mons. No comms. No AI oversight. Human minds only. Whatever they were planning, they didn't want any non-human logic involved. Rourke and Thalvira were separated, but only briefly. She was transferred to a cognitive integrity vault, a chamber where thoughts could be safely accessed by trained teleempaths and emotion screeners. Rourke underwent psychological reinforcement, brainwave calibration, and memory security implants. It wasn't paranoia. It was necessity. The thing they faced didn't need ships or weapons. It only needed the smallest sliver of doubt. The mission was simple now. They would lure it. The fold could not be entered again, but the harmonic breach it had used to extend itself still lingered in quantum resonance. Earth's best minds, working off Thalvira's fragmented data and the debris Rourke's team had salvaged, constructed an echo chamber array, a simulation network meant to reflect emotional signatures on a mass scale. In essence, a bait net made not of energy, but feeling. The only thing strong enough to draw the echo out was a concentrated burst of unguarded emotion. They debated long on what to use. Love, regret, joy, hatred. But all paled in comparison to one thing: grief. The simulation began. Rourke volunteered to be the emotional vector. His memories were calibrated, his pain unsealed. The moment the machine activated, he felt it. Not just the memories. The presence. It slithered into the network like an idea that had always been there. It tried to manipulate the emotional field, twist it. But this time, they were ready. They reversed the polarity, trapping the echo in a recursive emotional feedback loop. It wasn't pain that weakened it. It was understanding. Empathy. It couldn't stand being known. The array collapsed. Energy burst. Everything went silent. They checked the containment logs. No breach. No anomaly. The echo had either dissipated, or withdrawn. Thalvira cried. Not because it was over, but because something in her no longer felt cold. She looked at Rourke, and in her eyes, he didn't see fear anymore. He saw conviction. The kind that said, even monsters die when someone dares to stand with you. That day, Earth didn't claim victory. They didn't broadcast a warning. They didn't name the operation. They simply recorded it in a vault, locked it under human classification, and made a quiet oath. Asterisk, if it comes again, we will be waiting. Together, asterisk. Rourke was no longer just a soldier. After what he had experienced, after the darkness they'd faced, he became something else, someone whom Earth's command structure couldn't classify. His record was sealed, his identity wiped from active rosters, and his presence confined to shadow operations. But while the world moved on in peace, he remained haunted. Not by the creature they had trapped, but by the knowledge that it hadn't been defeated, only deterred. The fold still existed. Its breach points still lingered on the edge of unreality. And there were whispers, unofficial signals, unauthorized data spikes, inexplicable psychic flares from deep space, that the thing was still thinking. High Command assembled a task force composed entirely of humans. No AI assistants, no off-world allies. Their sole directive was to monitor anomalous emotional frequencies across the colonies. The reason was clear: wherever the echo would surface again, emotion would precede it. It needed feeling like fire needed oxygen. Humanity, it turned out, was uniquely dangerous to it, not because they were immune, but because they were resilient. They could suffer unimaginable pain, endure unbearable loss, and still press forward. Other species splintered under existential pressure. Humans grew sharper. Thalvira, now recovered and quietly reinstated as a xenocognitive consultant, understood this in ways no algorithm could. She had seen the creature manipulate her worst memories, then watched a human defy it using grief as a weapon. She didn't just respect them now, she believed in them. When Earth offered her permanent asylum and a new name, she accepted without hesitation. She wasn't just fleeing her past. She was joining a future she finally trusted. They trained together again. Not on combat simulators or firing ranges, but on cognitive battlefields. Emotional warfare was now a recognized field of defense. Soldiers were taught not only how to resist hallucinations and psychic intrusions but how to weaponize their own memories without succumbing. The mind became both shield and sword. And the elite force assigned to future contact was unofficially named the Morning Guard. Their insignia bore no rank, no flag, only a single, unblinking eye surrounded by a ring of thorns. They were ghost operatives, known only to a few, tasked with watching the dark corners of the cosmos. The first flare came from the outer colonies, in a system long thought quiet. A terraforming team had gone silent. Standard protocol was to send a recon drone. But Earth sent them. Rourke, Thalvira. 2 others trained in memory resistance, carrying gear that emitted calibrated emotional pulses, designed to attract or repel the echo's presence. What they found was worse than silence. The team hadn't died. They'd forgotten who they were. Logs showed engineers treating each other like strangers, forgetting their own names, their voices slurring as if their personalities were eroding in real time. It wasn't a massacre, it was disassembly. Minds unmade, identities fractured. The echo hadn't returned fully. But a fragment had passed through. They extracted the survivors, burned the facility, and sealed the system. Rourke didn't argue. He didn't feel rage or fear. Just cold precision. The being wasn't learning faster than them. It was probing. Testing boundaries. It wasn't looking to conquer. It was searching for a fit, a species weak enough to become its home, but complex enough to carry its influence across stars. That's why Earth was its obsession. Humanity was both a threat and a prize. Rourke knew the next confrontation wouldn't be physical. The echo had touched him, once. Briefly. It had tried to claw through his memory of the last battle he ever fought on Earth, back when he'd lost his sister to orbital collapse. But where others might have shattered, he sharpened. That pain became a fortress. They called it the Null Drop, a deep space test designed to simulate complete sensory deprivation and observe how long a human mind could maintain stability. Rourke volunteered. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just wanted to know how close he could get to the edge without falling. He lasted 6 days. The longest anyone had endured. On the 7th, something blinked into existence within the simulation. Not a hallucination, not an echo, but a message. Not words. A feeling, recognition. As if the echo was watching, waiting. It hadn't forgotten. It was studying how humans responded to pain, grief, even defiance. And in return, Rourke began to understand it better. It wasn't evil. Not in any traditional sense. It was indifferent. It didn't feed because it hated. It consumed because that was the only interaction it understood. Empathy was alien to it. Yet, when Rourke projected sorrow without anger, when he let the simulation echo his loss without resisting, the thing hesitated. As if confused. Disarmed. Emotion was its path in, but paradoxically it was also its weakness. Not raw emotion. Pure emotion. The kind not polluted by fear or hate. Earth changed its strategy. Instead of just monitoring or resisting, they began broadcasting emotional resonance through deep space relays, messages not of warning, but humanity, real, unsanitized memories. Laughter. Loss. Joy. Regret. The very things that made them vulnerable also made them unreachable. The echo would approach, but never quite enter. It hovered at the edges, unable to mimic or replace what was genuine. The war had changed. It wasn't a conflict of ships or weapons. It was a struggle of essence. Humanity's greatest shield was the thing they had long considered their weakness, the mess of their feelings, their chaos, their contradictions. Logic broke under pressure. Emotions didn't. Thalvira eventually asked Rourke why he kept fighting. Why he didn't just disappear into the peace Earth had offered. He didn't answer with words. He just opened a memory projection. A field. A child's laughter. His sister's last look before she fell. Not a goodbye, a promise, That was enough. The fold would always be out there. The echo would always try to return. But now, it was no longer met with confusion. It was met with clarity. Earth had learned. And in that learning, they had grown dangerous, not because they sought to destroy, but because they refused to forget. Because every time the echo returned, humanity would meet it with a story, a memory, a feeling it couldn't swallow. And Rourke would be there, ready to remind it, some things aren't meant to be devoured. The final message was sent from a deep space listening post in the Kuiper out zone, relayed through gravitational waveform, encoded not in language but in resonance. It was not a distress call. It was a whisper of contact, brief, faint, almost mist. The echo had touched the edge of the solar veil again. Unlike before, it didn't try to hide. It pulsed once and lingered, like a predator confident the prey had grown too complacent. The moment it registered, the morning guard activated their last protocol. No alarms. No announcements. Just a single phrase passed through the hidden neural network: the silence is listening again. Rourke had been preparing for this moment. He never lived like a man expecting peace. Every mission, every encounter, every whispered echo from a broken satellite had been leading to this. He stood ready, not out of duty, but because he had chosen to be the last wall between the galaxy and something that would erase meaning itself. He had nothing left to protect, no family, no city, no flag, but he still had purpose. That was more dangerous than revenge. That was something even monsters couldn't comprehend. Thalvira joined him one last time. She had aged in a way that wasn't visible in skin or motion but in silence between breaths. She understood now that survival wasn't the end of the journey. Survival was the burden. They weren't just defending reality. They were becoming the stewards of memory. The last defense against oblivion wasn't force. It was the ability to remember and carry forward what others would forget. The Morning Guard didn't fight for victory. They fought so that the past wouldn't vanish without voice. Earth authorized the last communion device, a fusion of neural resonance and living memory banks. It would house the soul prints of every individual lost to the echo, every colony destroyed, every final message that never made it home. It was a beacon, a sword forged of remembrance. The echo wasn't drawn to it by accident. It was designed that way. It invited the thing back not to trap it, but to show it what it could never become. Emotion, raw and untamed, but chosen. Humanity's pain wasn't a flaw. It was a declaration. The echo came in full. Not with noise or light, but silence that rippled across systems like the pause before the end. Communications flickered. Minds shivered across psychic channels. No words. No attack. Just a pressure, like reality holding its breath. The void had returned. This time, though, Earth didn't break. The relay stations didn't collapse. The guard didn't flee. They stood at the edge of the fold with the communion pulsing behind them. And for the first time, humanity answered not with weapons, but with memory. Every death, every sacrifice, every scream that went unheard was now spoken aloud in a million voices. The echo tried to assimilate it. Tried to fold it into its hunger. But the flood was too deep. There were no gaps. No hollows. Only complete, indivisible presence. The creature recoiled. It had never encountered emotion that wasn't fractured. It had never felt grief that didn't beg to be erased. But this was different. Humanity didn't present sorrow as a wound, it presented it as a monument. Rourke stepped forward, one last time. His voice never rose. He didn't shout. He whispered a name, his sister's, then his mother's, then the names of every soldier he'd buried in silence. Each name rang like a bell in the communion. Each name was a nail in the coffin the echo could never open. It tried again. This time it projected illusions, alternate histories, timelines where humans had surrendered, where no one had died, where he could have saved them all. But he didn't waver. Because he had accepted the truth long ago, loss defines worth. What you are willing to grieve for proves what you're willing to fight for. Thalvira added her own voice, filtered through hundreds of hours of mental therapy, spiritual contemplation, and Earth's flawed but beautiful empathy. She spoke not as a refugee, not as a xenobiologist, but as someone reborn in the embrace of a species that understood brokenness wasn't a curse, it was a bond. Her people had forgotten that long ago. That's why they fell. The echo cracked. Not physically, it couldn't be destroyed like matter. But its pattern failed. It spiraled inward, confused, overwhelmed. Its psychic tendrils grasped at meanings it couldn't swallow. Every human who had suffered now stood like a wall between it and the void it hoped to impose. Not as ghosts, but as witnesses. And witnesses do not bend. The fold shuddered and retreated. Not destroyed, but unable to stay. It slipped back into unreality, repelled by the unbearable brightness of memory that wouldn't fade. Rourke collapsed, but not in agony. In peace. The kind of peace that comes when a promise has been fulfilled. He had stood in the gap. And the night did not win. Earth declared no victory. There were no parades. No grand speeches. Just a quiet update in the morning guard's ledger. Status, vigil sustained. Humanity didn't celebrate because they knew the cost. They remembered every name that had become part of the communion. Every colony lost, every cry swallowed by the dark. But they also knew something else now, something even more vital. They knew that emotion, once considered weakness, was in fact a form of endurance. They knew their messiness was not a burden, but a language the universe couldn't silence. And they knew that some monsters don't die, they simply retreat when faced with something they can't consume. Something eternal. Something human. Years later, a child born on one of the outer colonies asked their mother why humans had names carved into every wall of every station. Why voices were recorded whispering sorrow into void-facing transmitters. She smiled and answered softly, "Because that's how we keep the dark from coming back. We don't forget. That's our power." The child didn't understand. But they listened. And one day, they would remember. The war was never about destruction. It was about disappearance. And humans refused to vanish. Their stories, their pain, their stubborn hope, they echoed louder than any monster. And in the silence that followed, the stars felt less cold.